Gas Grenade Pathfinder has been one of the most fun builds I've played so far in Path of Exile 2, and if you enjoy damage over time setups that feature a set and forget kind of playstyle, this one is going to be right up your alley. Let's immediately cover what the build is good at and what its weaknesses are. Gas Grenade is a skill that is exceptionally good at covering a single area. That makes it naturally very good for farming specific mechanics such as Simulacrum, where a lot of monsters are spawning in one localized area. That also means that this build is really nice for the current league mechanic, Abyss. For Abysses, you can drop several gas grenade clouds on top of the Abyss right as it's opening up and just watch all of the monsters melt to the proliferating poisons. Due to the mechanics of Gas Grenade, this skill is also very good at farming pinnacle bosses where you can pre-stack clouds to fish for high damage rolls and crit scaling. Now in terms of weaknesses, this is not the fastest build you can choose to play, and the mapping playstyle is not going to be for everyone. In a sense, there's a double delay where you need to shoot your grenades and then wait for them to detonate and then also wait for the poisons to deal their damage over time. This leads to a playstyle where you're kiting monsters very often and dodge rolling through packs due to the damage delay. Now let's get on to the mechanics of the build. This is a grenade build, so like most grenade builds, we'll be firing projectiles that land and then roll across the ground. The moment they're fired, they begin their fuse timer, and when that fuse timer hits 0, they detonate. But unlike most grenades, Gas Grenade does not go off in a huge explosion. It instead creates a green cloud on the ground. This part of the skill is known as the Poison Cloud, and it's considered to be a ground surface for the purpose of any mechanics that interact with that. The Poison Cloud will grow over its duration, and it will inflict poison on any targets within the cloud every 2 seconds. Notably, the cloud doesn't actually hit, but it poisons as though hitting. This means you do not need to pass an accuracy check, and for patch 0.3, the cloud can now critically hit as well, so we can scale crit a bit later into progression. Now normally, the Poison Cloud is flammable, which means that any detonator skill or any ignited ground or ignited enemies in its radius will cause it to explode. But that's exactly what we don't want to happen. So we make use of a new support gem that's very powerful for our build, Persistent Ground 3. This gem makes the cloud have 50% increased duration, making the cloud last an incredible 9 seconds before any other modifiers. But more importantly than that, it also prevents the cloud from being destroyed by anything other than expiring. When you combine the mechanics of Poison Cloud with the Pathfinder, the build really comes together. Contagious Contamination passes the strongest poison from a dying monster to nearby monsters, while Overwhelming Toxicity doubles our maximum poison limit, and these nodes together essentially combine to solve our clearing and single target damage. Now one of the other important components of this build is Plague Finger. The build doesn't use many unique items, but this one in particular is a core part of the setup that we're using. Normally, poison only scales based on the combined total physical and chaos damage in a hit, but Plague Finger will make it so that the poison calculation will also include any elemental hit damage as well. This is incredibly powerful because of the sheer amount of flat elemental damage you can obtain on the crossbow and rings combined, not to mention sources of gaining damage as extra elemental. This also means that we can make use of scaling elemental hit damage to directly scale our poisons, for example the Catalysis passive trait notable or the Elemental Armament support gem. Now whilst Plague Finger is an extremely important part of the build, it's not the only unique that we're using. On our weapon swap we make use of equipment that improves our supporting skills. Curse Carver grants more gem levels to Despair, while Effigy of Cruelty makes it so that our Dark Effigy Totem inflicts critical weakness when it critically hits. In turn, that grants Gas Grenades Poison Clouds more base critical hit chance, so it's more likely to provide those large poisons. And the final unique we're making use of in this build is a unique life flask, Blood of the Warrior. This one is only added to the build much later in progression once you have a good amount of energy shield scaling, but essentially this turns our life flask slot into a damage boost via rage generation and sustain. This life flask has the special property of not ending its effect when life is full, so you can keep it up all the time granted you have enough charges, and upon getting hit you'll gain some rage. The flask also prevents rage from falling off naturally, so keeping the flask active, you'll be able to build up to maximum rage over time and keep it, granting you up to 30% more damage. Now let's take a look at one of the highlights of this build, which is farming the highest tier of Simulacrum. I'll link the video for the full showcase in the description below if you'd like to see all of it, but I wanted to discuss exactly why this build is one of the absolute best there is at farming this content. Simulacrum is the pinnacle content for the Delirium mechanic. You spawn into an area with several smaller rooms, and gradually you move room to room and complete waves of Delirium monsters. This zone has some smaller rooms and some larger. The idea is that some of the areas are very confined, and naturally it's hard to avoid the incoming onslaught of monsters when you have nowhere else to go. But gas grenades mechanics combined with the Pathfinder's poison proliferation are exceptional in this encounter. The monsters constantly spawn from the sides of the room, and your gas clouds will cover the entire area of the room. Even the larger rooms will be completely covered in a blanket of poison gas. Because this creates a constant, reliable stream of damage over time, the spawning monsters will immediately be poisoned the moment they spawn, and they often die in the vicinity of new spawning monsters, immediately passing the strongest poison onto them, and so on and so forth. Now the other part of the Simulacrum encounter is the bosses, Omniphobia and Kosis, who spawn randomly. And once again, gas grenades mechanics excel at this because the poison clouds can stack up on top of each other, but with poison, only the most damaging poisons will deal their damage at any one time, up to the maximum poison limit. Now this means that if you have a critical hit poison cloud on the ground, it will continuously inflict critical hit poisons every 2 seconds for its full duration, meaning the gas grenades you're constantly dropping are overlapping the area and are essentially pre-stacking for those boss spawns. So the moment they spawn, they're instantly inflicted with a bunch of deadly poisons, and they just get melted. Another cool tech that we're using in this footage here is the Cursed Ground support with Despair, along with our weapon swap points. You can see how massive the Cursed Ground zones are, and we have 2 of them. They're pretty much covering the entire arena. Now, Cursed Ground creates an area that curses any monsters that are in the area at any time while it's active, so you don't need to be precise with its timing, you can just drop it down. I already discussed Curse Carver on the weapon swap to make Despair a bit stronger, and Despair is a curse that is lowering monster chaos resistance, making them take more damage from the poisons. We're also making use of the 24 weapon swap points to spec into nodes that improve the Despair curse, making it have a much larger area and a bit more effect. But the rest of our weapon swap points are going into crit and spell crit scaling to help the Dark Effigy totem in having a higher crit chance so it can inflict critical weakness. This is a purely single target setup. We can drop the totem before a boss spawns while we pre-stack poison clouds along with our curse. Dark Effigy hits with projectiles if the target is suffering from a chaos damage over time effect, which includes poison. And thanks to Effigy of Cruelty, when it critically hits, it will inflict critical weakness. This debuff adds a base crit chance to any incoming hits, so our gas grenades have a higher crit chance as a result. Now let's take a look at the gems. All of this information is available in the build guide linked below, but I'll briefly go over some of the key gems in this build. In the gas grenade link, we already discussed the importance of Persistent Ground. This is probably the single most important support gem. It provides incredible quality of life because very often you'll encounter monsters that can explode your poison clouds, and that feels really bad when it happens. There's also Encroaching Ground here. This is used during mapping to make the clouds cover a giant area over their duration. We swap this one out for Elemental Focus for more damage against pinnacle bosses where we don't need the area so much. Deadly Poison 2 is new in 0.3 and it's very strong. If you take into account the less damage multiplier, this works out to be about 40% more damage as a support gem, which is very good. And Arakadi's Lust is also new. This one ramps a little bit, but we reach max poison stacks very quickly, and once we're at that max poison limit, this is a 30% more damage multiplier. Now defensively, this build is using a fairly stock standard evasion and energy shield hybrid setup with Wind Dancer and Ghost Dance. We're using a defensive setup in Wind Dancer to blind and maim enemies in a large area whenever we do get hit. We're also using Withering Presence and Toxic Domain, which together are nice for a single target damage boost. Withering Presence applies stacks of Wither that make targets take increased chaos damage, while Toxic Domain is a skill we can use similar to Dark Effigy and Despair. We can kind of pre-stack it before a boss, and it will add pustules that explode for damage if they're dealt enough poison damage. Now let's take a look at the passive tree and our Ascendancy selection. Once again, a lot more detail is available in the written guide linked below, but I'll highlight the most important points here. For the Pathfinder Ascendancy, in addition to the crucial Poison branch, we're also taking an extra 6 passive points here, and the Relentless Pursuit node to make sure we're never slowed down by annoying slows such as Chill Ground, or Maim, or Hinder, or Temporal Chains. Until you've actually played with this node, it's hard to grasp just how incredibly nice this feels being able to ignore Chilled Ground and Temporal Chains and all of that stuff. But it's also very strong defensively. Being slowed down often results in moments where you're getting swarmed by monsters, so ensuring you're always moving at normal speed is a huge upside to the Pathfinder. On the passive tree, we're pathing down to the grenade nodes. These really can't be avoided because the extra grenade fired and the cooldown recovery are just too important to pass up. Then of course we're grabbing both notables on the tree to improve the base poison limit from 1 to 3, and combined with the Pathfinder notable, that's 6 maximum poisons. I'm also splashing into crit scaling on this build. The fun thing about Gas Grenade, as I discussed earlier, is that due to its duration and mechanics of constantly applying poison, you don't need to be fully all in on crit to benefit from crit damage poisons. Just a bit of investment combined with crit chance on the crossbow and the critical weakness from the totem will bring your crit chance up to a decent level and provide a huge damage increase overall. And then defensively, we're taking pretty much all of the evasion and energy shield wheels in the area. Subterfuge Mask is especially important here, as we obtain a huge amount of our total energy shield from using a pure energy shield helmet. Now speaking of the helmet, let's go over the items. I already discussed the uniques that this build utilizes, so let's look at the crafted gear. The most important of course is the crossbow. I have a crafting method available for this on my day 5 update for the build, I'll link that below. But you're looking for a high tier double flat elemental damage, especially lightning is important here due to its high top end. And then you also want elemental damage with attacks or grenade damage on here as the third prefix. The grenade damage modifier is exclusive to Abyss crafting. Then for suffixes, the +6 attack gem levels is from a perfect Essence of Battle, but the crit is important too because crossbows have such a low base critical hit chance. So having a high crit chance roll is really nice as you approach the latter stages of build development when you begin to splash into crit on the tree. Now another important part of the gear offensively is the rings. You just want a lot of flat added elemental damage here, combined with other useful stats such as resistances, attributes, life, that sort of stuff. The amulet is also important for damage scaling with +3 projectile gem levels, but also the anoint. In this case I'm taking crit chance and crit damage bonus from that one. The rest of the crafted gear is very much defensively focused. You want as much evasion and energy shield as you can on the body armor, and you want to utilize the other gear slots to help solve your resistances and attributes. Okay, we discussed a lot of the end game of the build, but what about the early beginnings? Over on the written guide here, I have a leveling section for Acts 1 through 3 prior to the full gas grenade swap. In the very early stages, we're using Explosive Grenade for single target because of how strong it is with multi-shot support. Those first few bosses like the Rust King get absolutely destroyed by it. Early on we make use of Contagion as well due to just how powerful this spell is without any scaling at all. Contagion applies a small amount of damage over time and spreads other chaos damage over time effects to nearby enemies. You can use this on its own in the first few zones of Act 1 to clear packs of monsters, and you want to target the weakest mobs in packs so they die and spread stronger dots to the rest of the pack. Early on, you can use this alongside Poison Chance linked to the standard crossbow shot skill to spread poisons alongside Contagion, but once you unlock Gas Grenade, that's your clearing soul for the early game. Make sure you link Gas Grenade with Corrosion and Bursting Plague. Drop gas clouds and spread the chaos dots to all nearby enemies. The poison will break their armor, and when they die, they'll explode for physical damage. Now the other really important part of the early game setup is the newly improved high velocity rounds. This skill applies a debuff to targets that have broken armor, making them take a portion of the damage from the previous hit. And this is very strong for single target damage. So for boss encounters, simply drop Gas Grenade to break their armor, and spam high velocity rounds. This is the setup all the way through to the end of Act 3. Make sure that you are regularly upgrading your crossbow, and importantly, You want a pure physical damage crossbow for the leveling process because high velocity rounds scales from physical damage, and you're not going to be using Plague Finger just yet. Now, at the end of this video here, let's quickly go over a few frequently asked questions. First, the most commonly asked question is, why Gas Grenade over Gas Arrow? The simple answer is that it deals much more damage. Gas Grenade's damage effectiveness for the Poison Cloud is almost 3 times as much as Gas Arrow. The next question is about accuracy. Your hit chance is low in the tooltip, why don't we have any accuracy scaling? So Gas Grenade's Poison Cloud poisons as low hitting, but it doesn't actually hit and it doesn't need accuracy. Monsters within the cloud will always be poisoned if they can be. And lastly, why no escalating poison support? This is the +1 to maximum poison support gem, so we go from 6 poisons to 8 theoretically. This would be 33% more damage roughly as a support gem, but it cuts the poison duration down a bit and slightly extends ramp time. Now, this is a personal preference. I prefer a 25% more damage support in elemental armaments over this support gem because it's slightly less peak damage but much more comfortable to play. And once you play this build, you'll realise that damage isn't an issue at all, so this is not a problem. Also, we do make use of escalating poisons on Toxic Domain, so we can reach 8 poisons on bosses. Now, if you have any other questions, be sure to post them below and I'll do my best to answer them. But that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoy this build if you do choose to play it. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.